Hello everyone. As Matt said, I am an outsider, please be nice. I've travelled all the way up from Bristol to do this, so hope you enjoy it. So yeah, we're talking about VR and AR, but on a budget, because I know that a lot of people have got these kind of big expensive kits, but when it comes to the general population, the sort of people that you're going to be talking to, your clients, people like that, you kind of want to go mobile. Not all the time. These big kits, they have their place, but when you look at the amount of people that have them in the UK, that you're talking about, more than 50 million people have got a smartphone, and less than 1 million. These are really accurate figures. Have got some sort of virtual reality or augmented reality headset. So it's worth looking into. So in terms of the sorts of things we're going to be looking at that can be done on smartphones or tablets, mobile devices in general, I'm going to be looking at things that fall into these three categories. So VR, virtual reality, augmented reality, and just general kind of viewing of models on mobile devices. In terms of VR, because of the constraints of what a mobile device can do, you can look at single viewpoint virtual reality. You could create a 360-degree video that kind of as if you're on some sort of rail and you can look around, or you can actually be inside a model and go to any position, but because of the kind of processing power of what you're using, you don't get that kind of photorealistic feel. And in terms of augmented reality, we'll be looking at two types. One of them is marker-based. So when you look at the augmented reality experiences that people sometimes use to sell stuff, you're looking at a marker, you put a device over the top of it, it jumps out of the page, it does stuff, that sort of thing. Or you can have, so iPhones and Android devices have this AR kit and AR core processing inside of them that allow you to map the environment and try and pick out the shapes of what's around you in order to place objects that are already loaded onto your device into real world space. The things we're going to be looking at, Autodesk cloud rendering, which I'm sure a lot of you have used before, something called KR Pano, which is it's basically a virtual tour, very, very cheap virtual tour software. Entity, which isn't going to be quite as cheap as it has been recently because they've changed how they're licensing it, but I'll go into that later. And Qubity, which yes, you have to say very carefully. I think the Americans call it Qubity, but I'm not sure whether that's any better, to be honest. How these fit into this kind of diagram, obviously the Autodesk rendering and KR Pano, they deal with this VR stuff. Entity and Qubity will do both AR and VR, and Qubity also allows you to view a model on a mobile device, which is quite useful. So we'll start off with the cloud rendering. Possibly teaching grandma to suck eggs, but if you're in Revit and you want to create a stereo panorama, that is a 2-image panorama that allows you to have some sort of depth of field or depth perception even, you just go to render in the cloud, pick stereo panorama, it sends it up to the cloud and then it renders it. So this is the sort of thing you get. You get an image that you can pan around, and obviously you need to get your materials right, you need to work on the model, otherwise you're just going to get something that doesn't look great. But what we noticed with the cloud rendering is that it also showed this QR code, and we thought that's kind of a cool tool. I'm sure everyone's used a QR code before and scanned it and it goes to that location. We thought that's brilliant, and you can also download this panorama as essentially as a web page setup. So it's got all the files you need if you wanted to host it in your own web server. So on a lot of our jobs, we do a lot of healthcare. This job's actually an education job. It's a secondary school. But what we tend to do is create what we call a C sheet. Other people will probably call them C sheets. If anyone knows what the C stands for, I'd like you to tell me because I don't have a clue. I've been doing them for 10 years and I still don't know. But essentially it's kind of an unfolded elevations, 3Ds, and certainly on our healthcare jobs it'll have a list of equipment that's in the room. And this thing's evolved from being just 2D when we were working in a 2D world, microstation, wow, and to having these 3D images on the sheet. But actually what would be really cool is if we had that panorama that you could scan, jump straight into, and it would allow the users to look at this in a bit more detail and really understand the space, because this quite often doesn't really get across the sense of scale or all of the kind of the layout detail that you want to portray. So how are we going to do that? So this is what we aim to do. Cheesy promo video. So the idea is that we issue, it could be hundreds of rooms, we issue the drawings before we have a meeting, we put the QR code on the C sheet. We hand out these free cardboard devices, they scan it with their phones, and it means that our users have seen the space and the room well before we actually go to speak to them. So they've got ideas. Quite often when before we would have turned up, it'll be the first time they've seen the space, and we'll end up having extra meetings because they haven't thought of that thing that's really crucial, and so we come back and then you end up having many iterations of the same meeting. So doing that once is fine. You could just go, well, I'll go into the cloud renderer, snip that QR code, it'll be hosted on Autodesk cloud server. But there's two problems with that. One, imagine doing that for 400 rooms. It's not going to be particularly easy. And secondly, when you do a new render, that QR code is going to change, you're going to have to update it. So that's no good. So how are we going to do it for loads and loads and loads of them? So the thing that answers all of my questions and my problems is Dynamo. So we turned to Dynamo to automate as much of this as possible. So there are a few steps to it. The first one is that we automated the production of the view. So essentially we created a view at the centre of every room. And the other thing that this part of the script did is it placed a light object that was massively bright, so that rooms that didn't yet have any artificial lights in them would actually kind of have a light source. The reason it works is because when you upload to the cloud render, it will automatically adjust the exposure, and we put it at exactly the same point. Because we're doing it with Dynamo, we can put it exactly the same point as the view point, so you don't get any kind of funny shadows from that sort of thing. So that's the first bit. The second bit, we use an external DLL that I was sent that you can link to in Dynamo to create the QR codes for all of the web pages that we're going to kind of upload this to. And the advantage of that is we can have a static QR code. So if we update the image, we don't have to change what's on the sheet. Someone just scans it again, and they get the latest image. Another script for placing the right QR code on the right sheet in the right place, because that's not going to be fun. And also taking that standard web page setup and distributing it into all these folders before being uploaded to our own web space. So this is what it ended up being. So essentially you've got a C sheet, you scan it. They're not the most beautiful drawings because we're not kind of embellishing them for any sort of visual effect. We're literally just rendering what's in the model. So quite often they don't look great, but what it does do is it allows people to see exactly where everything is. It allows them to get a feel of the size of the space, and they really understand it a hell of a lot better than they would if they were just looking at the drawings, because we're used to looking at plans and elevations and real people aren't. So initially this was just, and we would go into the user group with the client and the teachers, or the clinicians if it was a healthcare job. But actually, for a school, the kids love it. They know what their school's going to look like before they go into it, which is, I suppose it's the same with any VR stuff. But they got involved with it. They really loved it. And another thing that we didn't expect to happen was that we would pin these C sheets up on on the windows inside the rooms on site, and the guys that were coming in to do fittings or anything, they would come in and they'd actually have a better understanding of why they were putting the thing that they were putting somewhere, why it was going there. So it became something that was used throughout the process, and it became really useful. I'm going to run through this really quickly because this is just me being a kind of Dynamo geek. But essentially, I thought I was driving home one day and I thought, right, if you can use Dynamo to create loads of panoramas, why not use Dynamo to create 1,000 panoramas along a path and turn it into one of these 360-degree videos that you can kind of whiz around. I thought I did a bit of research, and someone asked the question. Someone said, "Can you do it?" And essentially, they got a response saying, "No, you can't do it." So I thought, well, let's have a go. So it's pretty straightforward. Just essentially, little script, create 1,000 views along this spline. And so it created 1,000 views, which is kind of straightforward. But this is where the problems start. You have the ability to download all. So if you want to download 1,000 panoramas, it will give you that option. The problem is if you try and open a zip file that is bigger than a certain size, it just does this. It says, "Can I open file?" Because apparently compressed folders that are bigger than 2 gig just don't work. So ended up having to split it up into probably 75 image batches. This is great fun. So once I got that, I was able to download all of them and open them. The next problem is that a VR, 360-degree VR video is made of what's called an equirectangular panorama. What you used to only be able to get out of the cloud render, that has changed now, was a cubic panorama, which is essentially 6 images that form a cube. And I needed to turn it into one of those, which is an equirectangular. Fortunately, you can automate stuff in Photoshop as well, and the route that I had to take was via one of the other bits of software that we're going to look at today, KR Pano. It will convert from one to the other. So you can go from a cubic panorama to an equirectangular panorama, but only if you chop it up into its component parts. So that's great. So once you've got all of your front, back, left, right, up, down bits, you can then turn them into your equirectangular panoramas. Then it looks like this, which looks a bit weird. But essentially this is 1,000 stereo panoramas or single mono panoramas just stitched together in Adobe Premiere Pro. That's not great, but you just add a bit of metadata and it then knows that it's a 360-degree video. If you want to have a look at it, get your phones out and scan that, and that'll take to the YouTube page. And then what you can do is just have a look around your 360-degree video, which is a nice gimmick, but it took forever, so don't try it. This is a one-off. There are probably very much easier ways of doing it, but I use Revit, so this is how I did it. Did everyone get that? They wanted to get it. Shall I go back? Man with phone up. Okay, right. So KR Pano. So this used to be a slightly long-winded way of you had to again cut it up into its constituent parts. Now they've updated the cloud renderer so that you can download a number of different types of panorama. So you get the cube strip. You can have a strip that's as a cross, the equirectangular panorama, or something for Gear VR, which is useful. But fortunately, KR Pano have actually updated, so you can just drag the regular cube strip straight in. So this is what it's capable of doing. If you create any type of panorama, whether it's an equirectangular one or a strip from any of these or pretty much anything, this is just the stuff that we use. You can drag it into KR Pano, and then it will create a virtual tour that can be viewed in a browser, which is really useful because it means that you can just look at it on any device essentially, which is what we're about because it's cheap. So the result looks a bit like this if it plays. You are kidding me. Oh, that's no good. Bear with me. If I've got an internet connection, I will show you instead. Okay. So, essentially, it's the same sort of, this is the same school that was in the video. It's the same thing with the C sheets, but you can wander your way around the building, and this just gets hosted on your own web space. Obviously, you need to have some sort of access to upload things to your own web space.
Does it generate the floor plan automatically as well?
So no, so that this is the other thing. It kind of, if you want to embellish a bit on it, you need a bit of kind of web developing knowledge, a bit of kind of scripting know-how. It wasn't too difficult. It took me ages to work it out, but we can now quite easily transfer that to other projects. This started off as a compass example that they had with something in the middle, and as you turned, it would turn it. But essentially, for each one of these, I don't tend to do this anymore, because for each one of these, you need to manually set the position and the starting rotation of that little kind of pointer that shows you where you are on the map. But it's useful. Anyway, I'm now wondering how many of my videos are now working. Okay. So, how to do it is fairly straightforward. You drag and drop. This is the kind of weird thing about it. It's not the most intuitive interface. You take panoramas and you drag and drop them onto a .bat file. You then open up this other executable that you drag one of the files that's been created into it in order to edit this tour. So from that point, it's pretty straightforward. You add a hotspot, which is a point you click on to go to another view. You say where you want that to go. You pick the image, hit save, and you can also set which direction you're looking at when you first open that view. So we like it. It works, and it's quite versatile because it's web-based. So we've done stuff like this for a big hospital we're doing in South Wales. We've created a website for it so that the clinicians can have a good look around before it's built. So kind of a different use of it, but again, this is because it's basically a web technology. You can just embed it in other things, and it does what it says on the tin. This is how much it costs. It's 129 euros. So that's pretty cheap. That's the version. Currently, that's what we've got. If you right-click, it says it's KR Pano, and it's got a little bit of kind of branding on it. But actually, when you're looking around it, it's not there. You can pay more to remove the branding and make it kind of a white label thing. But essentially, it's very cheap. So, in terms of the good and the bad, the fact it's browser-based means that you can view it on anything. It's customizable, inexpensive. I've got self-hosting on both sides of this, because the fact that you can host it yourself is potentially good for security. If you've got any security concerns, you can stick it behind the firewall, or you can stick it behind some sort of password protected stuff. It stays in Europe, or that sort of thing. Some of these other platforms might have their hosting outside of the EU, which might be an issue for some projects. In terms of the kind of the cons, the workflow's a bit odd. If you want to get the most out of it, you do need a little bit of web design knowledge and kind of scripting nous. And again, the fact you kind of need access to some sort of hosting in order to get it to work. So the next one, Entity. Essentially what this is, it's a marker-based, well, the way I've used it in the past, it's a marker-based augmented reality system. So you point your phone or your tablet at something you've made. So it could be a drawing of a plan, a site plan. It could be a C sheet, and a model can then appear out of the page. You could also make a video appear. You can turn it into a game, all sorts of things. But it's that's what it does. There's a plugin for Revit. I would say, I think I'll get onto it. Possibly don't use it. This kind of stumped me. I was putting this together, and then I don't know why my name is org ID star test 2. but essentially they sent me an email about a week ago saying the current version is going to be phased out. So I've got about 10 days left. If you want to try the current version, you've got 10 days, and then they're changing it to use kind of another system, which was nice of them. So they've got a plugin that allows you to either go to augmented reality or virtual reality. I'm just going to demonstrate the augmented reality. I didn't tend to use that plugin because there's a limitation in file size. So if you try and export something, it becomes more than 50 meg. It just says no, you can't do it. And also the materials don't come through as well, but it will take a number of different formats. So what I tended to use is the free Lumion exporter that will create a Collada file, a .dae, and that will bring through the materials a hell of a lot better. So this is the interface. You can see you've just got projects here. You're then prompted to create a marker. So this will be something that's on a plan or you know, it could be a piece of paper. I've used a business card so that you can look at your business card and something pops out and that sort of thing. And essentially you can then bring in different parts of the model. This isn't the most straightforward thing. You have to bring it in, scale it right down, maneuver it into place in order to get it to work. But yeah, the light source and other things that can appear based on whatever interactivity you use. The thing I really liked about it is that it's got this Dynamo type visual programming interface, so you can get it to do certain things. So this, I think these are switching things on and off based on when you touch the screen. So, but you can do other things as well. You could link to external content and all that sort of stuff. If you look on the App Store, there's two. The newer one is Entity 3, which is coming out. And Entity, and that's the one that if I've got some examples that we can have a look at in the break. That's using that if anyone wants to download it. So you just get your tablet or your iPhone out, you scan it. If it works, it will identify a project. So you don't actually need to know. You don't need to preload it on. It recognises the image, goes through it, somehow goes through its kind of database of stuff and recognises what project you've got. You're then prompted to download it, so the whole model's on your device, and then this happens. So it allows you to set up this interactivity. The reason you've got columns coming through is some sort of weird glitch with the export from DAE, but this is how it works. And this is where the kind of price comes in. I've been kind of testing it, and it was basically a free trial. You can just sort of see what you can do with it. Their pricing now is $55 a month, which actually doesn't seem too bad. But whether you're going to be able to do enough projects to get the most out of it kind of depends on how you go about your business, I suppose. So pros and cons. The big thing is the interactivity. The fact that it's fairly straightforward. You don't have to be scripting stuff in order to create interactivity for augmented reality. I like the visual programming stuff that you can do. It will take multiple formats. It's marker based, which is both a good thing and a bad thing. I'll show you why it's a good thing a bit later on. And you can combine multiple files, which is different to Cubity, which I'll show you next. You can adjust the materials once you've put the models in as well. So if you want to change how things look, or once you've got the model into the editing environment, then you can do that. And you can have this white label thing that you can brand based on your company. It's no longer free to test, apart from kind of I think it's a 10-day trial, which might not be enough to really kind of figure out whether you want it or not. And it's got this 50 meg individual file limit. So if you've got quite a big thing that you want to put in there, you need to kind of work out how much is 50 meg when you're exporting these files. And £55 a month, is it expensive? I don't know. So the next one, Cubity. How am I doing for time? Wow. Okay. So Cubity. The thing about this one is that it works across devices. It's got a browser-based viewer. It's got a VR, AR. It's kind of all mixed into one, which is pretty cool. it's the weird thing is it's SketchUp based, which makes me a bit sick. But that's just how it optimizes it. So what it also, the same company has a Revit to SketchUp converter, which is actually quite good if you ever need to send a SketchUp model to an interior designer. So you can either use the Cubity exporter. If that doesn't work, you can try Revit 2 SKP, which is the and these are again all available on the Autodesk App Store. Is that what it's called now? So yeah, Cubity exporter, and it then opens up your model in the software that you've the software is essentially free. I think it's just the license to. I think you can have one model at a time if for free. So that's kind of how it looks. Doesn't look brilliant. It's just kind of a shaded view. It does bring some materials through, and what I've clicked on there is the web link. So essentially, you can have the model, and the thing about this is it looks the same in whatever your platform you're looking at it on. So this is on the web. You can just send that link to someone. They can see the model, which is quite good. Has that just stopped, or is it? That's just loading. So that's fine. And then you have a set of other links to platforms that are accessed via QR codes. So the first one is to basically as a model viewer on a mobile device, which looks a bit like this. It's really difficult to film what you're trying to show on a tablet, holding a phone, looking at it. But it's pretty cool. As you can see, the materials come through in a funny way. You've got some fairly enormous holes in your acoustic ceiling panels there, but what can you do? The next one is the cardboard viewer. So this is sort of what it looks like in cardboard. You get your two views, and what makes this quite good is that it puts the whole model inside the cardboard environment, so you can go to any point. You're not limited, as you are with KR Pano, where you've got to have rendered that view, or the 360-degree fly through. You have to be on that path. This enables you to get to whichever point you want, which is quite good. And the other one's the AR. So this uses. I don't know whether it's got AR Kit. It's AR Kit is the iPhone one. That's what this is running on. Whether it's got AR Core, the Android one, I don't know. But this is how it looks. Looks pretty crisp. We can look at these in the break as well. Yeah, geometric fidelity not great. You've got holes in your monitors there, and again materials don't look perfect. The other issue, if you've got a big model, it's a multi-disc thing, loads of stuff, you just get errors. It times out. It doesn't like anything that's too massive. So that's one downside. Cubity supports SketchUp up to 1 gig. So, but it won't tell you that in its conversion it's going to be bigger than a gig until the end. And this was my example of why it's not so good on the train if you're using these AR Kit, AR Core stuff, because it actually uses something like the accelerometer in your phone, and this is what happens. It just doesn't know where it is. Whereas if you were using a marker-based system, it would just stay there. It's pretty cheap. I actually got it for €50 because they had a sale. But 199 euros for a year is pretty good. With all that stuff. Pros and cons: multiple platforms, VRAR and a model viewer, direct export from Revit. The whole interface is really kind of straightforward and user friendly. It's not expensive. File size limitation isn't great. The geometric fidelity isn't perfect. You can't edit it once it's gone in. No interactivity other than kind of obviously whizzing around it, and it's based on SketchUp. So what have I missed? There are other things that will enable you to do this. Unity is probably the big one. Most examples that I've seen have used Unity. It's a proper game engine. I haven't managed to kind of look at it in any depth yet. This is cool. I saw this at AU London last year. It's like kind of the big boys, like HoloLens, but it uses just a mobile phone, and they've got these other markers for kind of full room scale stuff. They have a kind of development interface, but it seems a hell of a lot more complicated. But it might be worth looking at, because you can get this box of tricks for 30 quid and have a little play around with it. So I might have a look at that. And Autodesk have this Project Play thing, which is a fully web-based creation tool for basically 3D viewing of content on the web. Which I think possibly has potential. It's only a technology preview at the moment, but that might be something you want to look at. And that's me. If you want to scan that, that's my contact details. Thank you very much.